Hello, today in class we talked about the volume of a cylinder and we didn't have enough time to actually finish it. So I posted a video yesterday that covers this chart that's on front and it covers this chart on back. Today I'm going to ask you to work on the practice set. So you can rewatch that video to the parts we didn't have time to do, or I'm just going to go over briefly just this particular column. And there's a couple different things we notice in the cone: the orientation, meaning the way that it's tipped, or the position that it's in. If we notice, this is actually the height. The height goes from the tip of the cone and touches the base, which is the circle, and that is 27 inches. The diameter, oh, they gave us a diameter, which we're not going to be able to use in our formula, but that will lead to the radius. In our diameter, we only want half of it. Half of a diameter is a radius, so we just want half. Half of 18 is 9. So we're really working with the radius and the height. So those are the two dimensions we need. The official formula is written as volume of a cone is 1/3 times pi r squared, that's where the circle comes in, times the height of the cone. But as mentioned briefly in our notes up at the top of this page, instead of taking 1/3 of this, we can take the base, which is the circle, times the height, and instead of multiplying it by 1/3, we could divide it by 3. So we're going to use that. But before we do, I want to let you know, I prefer to kind of move the pieces, so to speak, the parts around. So the base has pi times r squared times h. And I prefer to put pi at the end. So I'm going to keep the r squared times the h, and I'm going to move it times pi. So the only thing missing right now is the 1/3. Instead of multiplying by 1/3, I'm going to choose to divide by 3. But I'm just going to use it on this section and save pi for last. And I think this is going to actually make things easier. So 1/3 pi times r squared times h. And this part here is the base. So we see it, check, we have it, we've just separated it. We have the h, and instead of 1/3, we're taking it divided by 3. So that means what I'm going to substitute. Let's get to the substitution part. This is r squared, so that's 9 squared times the height, which is 27, and I can divide that by 3. And I'm going to multiply that times pi. So again, since we're working with the exact answer, we're going to be able to leave the symbol in math. Now, if you've worked with factoring before, we could take 27 and divide it by 3 and get 9, and we'd have 9 times 9 times 9. But I don't know if everyone's had a chance or an opportunity to do that. I'm not sure what information's been lost in the past. So I'm going to just take it step by step as we see it. Order of operations would tell us we want to square this first. So I now have 81 times 27, still divided by 3, times pi. And now take 81 times 27 on your calculator, then divide it by 3, and see if you have the same answer that I'm going to write in a minute. So after we've accomplished all of that, we should have this entire thing should be 729. So 81 times 27 divided by 3 is 729. And the exact answer means we get to leave pi in the math. So the good news, if we're going to continue and use the pi key, we have all the information we need. We just press 729 times pi and then round to the requested area. Now if we're going to work with this, the difference would be is we get to replace pi with 3.14. And once again, I tend to leave that for the last step, because we could use 729 times 3.14. So now let's go ahead and try one of the practice problems together. And I think because you do not have your calculator and the fraction key, it might be best to use this particular formula where we divide by 3. So let's try that. So let's work on problem number 2 together. And you may decide that you'd like to have an extra sheet of paper because I know there's not a lot of room on this. So we're going to start with the formula. And the official formula says volume equals 1/3 times pi times r squared times h. But we're going to morph that into r squared times h divided by 3. So we have the 1/3 accounted for, the radius accounted for, and the h accounted for. And by the way, I can do this because the commutative property lets me move anything that's being multiplied, order does not matter, times pi. And since it's a symbol, I don't have to write that dot. I could put it side by side or use parentheses. So now every part of this is accounted for. And frankly, this is going to make your life a little bit easier, I believe, to work with this dividing by 3 instead of multiplying by 1/3, because mathematically it accomplishes the same thing. So we're supposed to find the volume of this cone, and it asks us to use the pi key, round to the nearest tenth, and to show all steps. So we've already started out with the formula. We're going to use that, and you can write it here if you want. I'm just going to choose to write it where I have more room. So now I have to identify a radius, and I have to identify a height. So this is a little bit more clear that that's the height because of the orientation. I can see it coming up off the ground. So the height is 10 centimeters. Now if I look at this, it goes all the way across, so I know that's a diameter, and the diameter is 22 centimeters, but there's not an R, there's not a D in my formula, so I'm going to need the radius, not the diameter. And so I'm going to take the diameter, and I'm going to divide it by 2, because I just need halfway across from the center out, and that will be 11 centimeters. So now I'm ready to substitute or plug in your values. So now we're ready to substitute the formula. So we're going to start with V for volume of this cylinder equals r squared. So now we're going to replace that with 11 squared times the height, and the height is 10. And we're dividing that by 3 instead of multiplying it by 1/3 times pi. And again, I'm going to wait till the very end to work with pi. So would you please on your calculator take 11 squared, which is the same thing as 11 times 11, then multiply it by 10, and then divide it by 3. When you have that, look back and see if we agree on the answer. So hopefully you came up with a very lovely answer of 403.3 repeating. And we're still trying to multiply that times pi. So if this were the exact answer, we'd be finished after we wrote centimeters cubed, and I think last time I said squared, so please correct that. But it asked us to use the pi key and round to the nearest tenth. So take your 403.3 repeating times pi, and then let's see if we agree on that answer. So depending on how many digits of pi your calculator that you used was able to hold, I'm going to write what's on the calculator that I used, but if you used your calculator on your iPad, you probably have more digits. And it continues. So we are not quite done now. Now we have to round to the nearest tenth. So this is the whole number. That's the decimal dot and T for tenth. So it's 1,267 and 1/10, or 1,267 and 2/10. What does this 0 tell this 1 to do? And if you said stay, that's correct. So our final answer is approximately 1,267 and 1/10 centimeters cubed. And would you make that correction on my last? So we've done everything it asked. We found the volume, we've used the pi key, we round to the nearest tenth, and most importantly, we've showed all of our steps. We've shown all of our steps. Why this is so important, I know often students think that the answer is the most important. While that is important, how we found it is equally as important. If we made an error, if we show all of our steps, it's easy to retrace that and figure out what we did. But if you just don't show if you just show a few steps, it's hard to figure out what was the error. And if we can find our error, we can correct it so that our answers will be correct as well. So I'd like you to continue by working on number 1 independently. And then number 3 is a challenge. It's very similar to the one we did today in class. I believe it was number 5. And this gives us the volume. You're going to use 3.14 in place of pi. And so this one would be a challenge problem. I'd love for you to try it. Number 4 mentions this time, it says a cylinder cone have congruent heights and radius, or radii, which is the plural of radius. What is the ratio of the volume of the cone to the cylinder? So I'd like you to think about that and answer number 4. And then finally, I'd like you to try number 3 independently. Again, find the volume of the cone, round to the nearest tenth. And since they didn't say which form of pi to use, that generally implies when they say rounding to use the pi key. So thank you for listening. Please continue to work on this and enjoy the rest of your day.